Folks, happy Friday. Welcome to the Freedom from the Press podcast. My name is Jason Robertson at JRob from MN on Twitter. I'm here with my co-host.
And I'm Todd Peterson. Happy New Year, everybody. And Jason, I should have picked a better handle because I'm Tamtrib at Tamtrib, Tamtrib. That's a tough one to get across here.
Yeah, I guess, who knew? I remember when I first got my Twitter handle, it was like Jason Robertson 8973458. So, folks, yeah, exactly. We had to upgrade it. All right, folks. So it's funny as we get into this week's episode, we wrapped up Christmas. I hope everybody had a phenomenal Christmas and got everything they wanted. And Todd and I were talking about what should our last show of the year be. And we were going to do a recap of all the crazy news of 2023. And I mean, there was so many stories from Chinese spy balloons to murder hornets to monkeypox to, all the Trump stuff. It was wild. Todd, what'd you think about the news last year?
It felt exhausting, Jason. And I think a lot of people are to the point where they're like me, where it's like, I'm kind of over it. Like the stress levels, the cortisol, like it peaked, and it's tough to keep that momentum going. But that's how Democrats win, everybody. That's how the left and the globalists and the elites and whatever you want to label them, they're all the same at the end of the day. But that's how they win, is when you tune out because you just can't take it anymore. And Jason and I, we're family guys, we're friends guys. We'll tune out on the weekend, but you got to stay involved. You got to stay informed. Otherwise, if you just say, I can't take it anymore, they're going to do whatever they want. And Jason, speaking as a Minnesotan here, Minnesotans didn't pay attention. And now we have Democrats just doing an absolute great job of mimicking California and running the state into the ground. So you got to stay informed out there as hard as it is.
Yeah, who knew Minnesota and California have like a contest to see which can be the shittiest state and pass the stupidest laws. But it was funny too, as we were flushing out all the news from last year and we were trying to build our top 10, it occurred to us that most of these storylines aren't resolved. If you think of the world like a movie, the movie's still going on. And then, we did a show a couple weeks ago about predictive programming and how they're trying to implant some of this stuff so that it makes it normalized. And it was funny because almost every story you can go, okay, that happened, but that storyline's not resolved. So then, do you want to play that one clip that kind of triggered this episode, Todd?
Yeah, what is a black swan event? We'll be right back. Watch this.
Well, mine's a little dark. I just feel a lot of concern that 2024 may be the year of a black swan event. This is a national security event with high impact that's very hard to predict. There are a number of concerns that I have that factor into that. Not only this sort of enduring heightened threat level that we're facing, the wars in Israel, also Ukraine. And we're so divided in this country in ways that we haven't seen before. And I think that just creates fertile ground for our adversaries like North Korea, China, and Iran. And that's what concerns me most.
So that just dropped last weekend. And was that on MSNBC?
Was that CBS?
Or maybe it was CBS.
CBS.
It was on left-leaning news. And then it was funny because when I saw that clip, it triggered something in me. And I'm like, holy cow, they are setting all this stuff up for something. And Todd, maybe explain to the viewers what a black swan event is, because a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, and she tried to explain it. I believe she used the word adversarial or something major that happens that disrupts the normal course of events. So here we are, we're entering 2024. We think, okay, I got a new job. I'm excited about that. The kids finishing up the school year. Here's that. We have a vacation plan, and oh yeah, there's a presidential election in November, so we'll vote around that time. But a black swan event says all those plans you made and those things you thought were going to happen, forget about it, because things are not going back to normal. And so as we run through the list here, we talk about war, a pandemic. We have some fun ones on the list too. Get the tinfoil hat out. Something could happen, and Jason and I think something will happen that's going to change the way that you live your life, maybe permanently or for the foreseeable future. And specifically because they need to do something about the 2024 presidential election. And Jason, I just want to add here, I can't not think about predictive programming. Did you notice at the very end of that clip there, she's like something that North Korea or Iran is going to do? Notice that they're framing this up as like, those are the boogeymen in our heads. Those are the bad guys. The U.S. government is not the bad guy. Don't worry about them. Joe Biden's not a bad guy. Don't worry about him. It's North Korea.
Yeah, and what's funny is if you think about black swan events, they are large catastrophic events that cause dramatic overreaction or action by the government and by the populace. 9/11 was a black swan event. And I think we can say many years after 9/11, there's a lot of weird stuff about 9/11. We had the mortgage crisis in 2008, another black swan event, dramatically changed the country. COVID dramatically changed the country in ways we're still dealing with today. And so, as we were flushing through things, we tried to come up with our top 10 list of what to be on the lookout for black swan events this year. Now, I'm going to say some of these are easy, some of these are a little out there. So, we'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Like, are we crazy? Are we nuts? What do you think we missed on the list? And ideally, we'd love to have some interaction from the viewers or listeners to say like, oh yeah, I never thought of that. And I'm going to say, when we start this list, we left a lot of big things out. So one of the hugest things is pick your financial catastrophe. Banks collapsing, U.S. debt, 34 trillion, BRICS. Like, that didn't even make the list. And that's bubbling. The reason I didn't think that'll be on the list is because I think the central banking system has a vested interest in making sure it doesn't collapse until after the election. Because if one of these financial catastrophes hits, then that's going to be a dramatic swing in the election to the conservative America First side. So personally, if you wonder, like, why is that not on the list? Oh yeah, and Stanley already coming in with a great comment. Biden takes into World War III. Stanley, we got like 3 of those on the top 10 list. Wait till we get into it.
What do you do when ratings are low? You start a war. So look out for that one. That is definitely on the list, Stanley.
Yeah. All right, Todd, should we start this list? What is number 10? What is
All right. You may have heard about this, but it kind of died out of the news lately. But Russia, Ukraine, is it going to make a comeback, Jason? What will happen in that part of the world in the upcoming year?
Yeah, it's funny. As you look at Russia, Ukraine, this has been going on for a year and a half now, almost 2 years. We've poured hundreds of billions of dollars into this conflict. Everybody's getting rich off of it. The military industrial complex. We did an episode about the Vindmans over there after the Trump thing. The corruption ties into the Joe Biden and the Biden family and Ukraine. It's just it's just this cluster of stew of who knows what or how that's going to blow up. Todd, any thoughts on how that
you talked about how the stories of 2023 were unresolved. There has been no explicit exit strategy laid out. And we always hear about, I think of going into the Middle East 20 years ago with Bush. There was no plan to get out. There was a plan to go in and create democracies, but really no exit strategy. There is no exit strategy in Ukraine. There's even, I don't know, Jason, to the best of my knowledge, even defined goals in this in this war other than send money and munitions over there and get all these Ukrainian men killed. In what appears to be a one-sided battle at this point. My comparison to this, Jason, if you remember to 2020 and the pandemic hits around March, in June, there was another thing that set people off, and we had protests in the streets across the country. And at the time I said, well, the COVID narrative is going away because you have hundreds of thousands, millions of people marching the street, no masks, side by side for weeks. And so there's no way COVID's going to come back, because how can they defend that? Lo and behold, the George Floyd riots died off, and here's COVID again, and even Biden comes in and mandates the vaccine well after those protests. So in my mind, I think, okay, Russia, Ukraine died down because you have what's happening in Israel, in the Middle East. You have some other things brewing that we'll kind of talk about here, but maybe those stories don't gain traction, and okay, let's prop up Russia, Ukraine again. So I see this as kind of like COVID 2.0 in the sense of like, we thought it was gone, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're getting some great chats in there saying, I think Russia, Ukraine will soon be at an end. I don't think Ukraine can hold out much more. It's interesting because this one's tough. I think Ukraine's running out of bodies, and I think that it's winding down, and I think that Americans as a whole are kind of against this war. That's why it only makes it in the top 10 list as number 10, because I think we can all say, okay, this one is probably going to die down. I wouldn't be shocked if it makes a resurgence. We send them another 100 million or $100 billion or whatever we come up with. But that's why this one lands at number 10 for us.
All right. Well, number 9, we don't want to leave other regions of the world left out here. What about China and Taiwan, Jason? There's been rumblings for years. We thought Trump would get us in World War III. By we, I mean the media. We've been speculating that with Joe Biden in office after Ukraine happened, why wouldn't China get involved? Because Biden proved that he's not up to the task of defending other people.
Yeah, it's funny. And I made this point before, but our media tries to act like Joe Biden is this great statesman and he's all there. And we've played a million clips, and everybody's seen a million clips of Joe Biden being an old doddering man who poops himself. And at the end of the day, the world sees that. Xi Jinping sees Joe Biden. Xi Jinping has a meeting with Joe Biden and talks to him. And so whatever the media is going to share with, running screen or running interference for this clearly mentally compromised old man who probably isn't even running the country, the world sees. And if you look at the Chinese Taiwan conflict, and for those who don't follow them, the new federal state of China is a phenomenal resource. I work with them on the Wayne Dupree podcast. I do Monday through Thursday. And in the new federal state of China, it is a bunch of Chinese whistleblowers who are talking about how they can overthrow the Communist Party in China. And the Chinese Communist Party, they have infiltrated all over the world. They have military bases essentially in the United States. It's ridiculous. You see a bunch of Chinese nationals come in, but for them, the nation of Taiwan, which used to be part of China proper, when you hear the one China policy, they split off decades ago and formed their own government because they didn't want to be part of the Chinese Communist Party. They make a ridiculous percent of the world's microprocessors. They've got just huge technology. It's a huge financial asset. So ranking in at number 9 for us is an escalation in the Chinese-Taiwan conflict. Now, how does that impact us? That impacts us because we have to decide which side of the conflict we want to be on. Now, Taiwan is a democracy. So, of course, as we've heard in Ukraine and all these places, we're going to die for democracy. Whereas China is full-on communist USSR dictator. But China owns us. We need to get how many things? Like they make most of our pharmaceuticals. They make a lot of our iron and steel. They make all sorts of things. So we're on the hook for China. So that one will be an interesting take for how it shakes out. And any thoughts on where you think that one goes, Todd?
Yeah, perfectly said, Jason. The other layer to that is China seems to be running out of time in terms of their demographics and their financial situation. So like you and I only know what we read about China through sources that may or may not be accurate, but they certainly say that if we think we have a tough financial situation in the United States, that China definitely does, because they've propped up real estate and these other asset classes well beyond what they're able to. Again, anytime you have a centralized government, you can't, and you're not responding to market forces, it's all a fraud. But the other thing is that with the one child policy going back decades, you're kind of getting that to catch up to you now. And so if China wants to make a move militarily, a lot of people are saying that it has to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. Otherwise, there's no fighting age really that's going to be up to the task of taking on another elite force like the United States. So you got the time against China. And like you said, they got the Biden administration right now not looking too tough. So if China wants to make a move, it has that option and reason to do it as well.
Well, and I think part of why this makes our list is you've got 2 factors. Todd hit one. You need money to fight a war, and China's facing a huge economic problem. If you study the Chinese economy, they've got a lot of bubbles they're sitting on. The second thing is if President Trump wins in 2024, which I know I want, Todd wants, a lot of our viewers want, that will change the dynamic of the China-Taiwan situation. So for them, it would throw it out 4 more years that they may not be able to make it till. So yeah, that's why it comes in on the list, number 9. But
And
we
Jason,
still think
really fast too, it doesn't even have to be an invasion. The wrinkle is, what if China just blockades some of the shipping lanes? So maybe there's not forces on the island, but what if they just say, we're going to kind of screw with everybody? You have to get ships. And we got some maps we're going to show in just a second here as it relates to the Suez Canal, but same idea. If they wanted to disrupt global trade and global economies, they very easily could. And then what does the US do? Do they attack first to clear the lanes? So China's got a couple options right now that we will be watching in 2024 as a possible Black Swan event.
Yeah. Now we come up to one that's going to hit really close to home and should make everybody get that tingle down their spine. So since Joe Biden became president, the first thing he did was remove President Trump's stay in Mexico policy through executive order. What that means is that if you're somebody seeking asylum in the United States, you apply, you stay out of the country while they process. If they decide you qualify for asylum, they let you in to America. Joe Biden reversed that. What happened? We are seeing millions of people come across the border. Last year, 2.3 million across the southern border. If you add on the northern border, it's over 3 million people. This year, I've seen projections all over the place, but it was 270,000 the last 3 months running, and they've already hit the highest month of people crossing the border. There's videos of migrants coming across, and you look at the economic impact that has on America, and that alone could be an issue. You see Chicago and New York and a lot of these cities saying this isn't a problem, but Todd, that's not what worries me about these migrants.
That's not what worries me at all. And again, selective editing. But when I watch clips of who's coming across the border, the thing that stands out to me is that it's all young men. I don't know where the families are. I assume there are kids in cages, but I haven't heard AOC talk about anything. So maybe that's not an issue. But I see a lot of young and, let's be honest, fighting age males. And Jason, you referenced millions of people coming in. How many would it take for there to be a sleeper cell activation and get a massive terrorist attack across the United States? A fraction of that, just a fraction of that. So maybe 2.9 million are good people. That still leaves 100,000 possible sleeper agents that, okay, here we go.
Yeah, so let's put this in perspective. So number 8 for us is a terror attack with a sleeper cell activation. Let's put some things in context. How many people pulled off 9/11? Not a lot. Not a lot.
20, if we're being generous. Well,
right.
20 Middle East nationals. But if you want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm sure there were some other people in higher up places and governments involved too.
Less than 100. Now, let's say how many people on the terror watch list have come into America that we know of? Been several hundred. Okay, let's talk about what happened in Israel and Palestine on October 7th. Todd, do you remember how many people?
I'll say 100.
It was actually about 1,100 total.
1,100. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah. So about 1,100 people did the horrific attacks in Israel. And we have let 5-6 million people in this country the last 2 years. 100, 1,000 could easily strike, do something. You see it with the protests in these big cities. They're all pro-Israel, or they're all pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas. And Hamas, they do terrible things. So number 8 on our list, terrorist attack.
And that one scares me. Remember, Jason, we had the Day of Jihad. This was back in October. You and I talked about it on the podcast, actually, when it was occurring, but shortly after the events in Israel and with Hamas's attack. Nothing happened. And so, again, when nothing happens, it lulls you into comfort, like, oh, they're just talking. It's all noise. This is just people, pundits, trying to make a name for themselves. But no. That's the boy who cried wolf right there. So they're going to get you to be quiet and apathetic and indifferent. And then that's when they will get you when you're not paying attention. So Jason, of the things on the list here, this is number 8, but why wouldn't this happen? I mean, in 2020, we had the Summer of Love, and that was deadly, disastrous. And that was just people that were upset. Imagine people with a purpose and a mission.
Yeah, it's scary, and it's funny as you look through this list, and so far we haven't even got crazy. We're going to get a little crazy in the next couple, but I think anybody watching the show will go, I can totally see that happening. And now they're starting to talk about some of these things happening, and all these things have been building and building and building. But Todd, what do we get to at number 7 on our list?
This one actually seems the most plausible to me. This is Joe Biden is not on the ticket. And folks, it could be any number of reasons here. Joe is old. Joe's got some health issues. He could very well pass away in the next year. I'll leave it at that. Maybe he would pass away of natural causes, Jason, let's say, but he might be off the ticket due to death. He might, and I think this is also likely he survives, get forced to step down because he is not a popular president and the Dems need to win. They were able to deceive all of us in 2020. Like, Joe's a moderate. He'll bring adulthood back into the White House. They can't do that again in 2024. So Joe's got to go, and he's got to go one way or the other, I think.
Yeah, and why would this be a black swan event? Because on the Democratic side, you take Joe Biden out. You can speculate why he goes. He voluntarily drops out. He has a health problem. Something happens. We can all say we can't believe the Democrats are going to try to run him again because he's just.
I can't believe he's still here.
Right. Yeah, it's shocking. But the chaos that would ensue would be remarkable. So to explain the electoral process, the Democrats are going through the primary process just like Republicans. Votes start in January on the Democratic side. And the Democrats have canceled all debates, and the primaries are basically they're going to be run without any public debates or forums or anything. They're just pushing Joe Biden as the nominee. Now you've got RFK Jr., who, depending on the polls, anywhere from 10 to 30% in states. You've got Marianne Williamson, who's declared. I've seen her poll in some states as high as 10%. She's nuttier than a fruitcake.
But it just shows they don't want Joe Biden. The voters do not want him on the ticket.
Yeah, and these are people who have not much money supporting them. They're using social media, and Democrats are still supporting. But depending on when they get rid of Joe, they're going to get through this primary process, and they're not going to have a primary. And then if Joe drops out before the election, they're going to be left with, what do we do? If you look at one of their biggest voting blocks, African Americans, Democrats just chalk that up. That's why you start hearing them talk about racism now. We're getting ready for an election, so it's time to bring racism back. But they've got Kamala that they got to try to get rid of. Do they bring in Michelle? Do they bring in Gavin? And this is going to create, most people don't realize that when they stole the 2016 nomination from Bernie Sanders, there were protests on the Democrat side. They just didn't, the news media didn't cover it. But now with social media and unsuppressed platforms like Twitter, I think you could see a real world where you have kind of a mutiny on the left. The corporate end of the left will want to put somebody like Gavin Newsom or Kamala in. The radical left is going to want their crazy, and you might see a fracture of the Democrat Party.
And Jason, it can't be left unsaid here. You know who's making some media rounds again? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton. Imagine voting for Hillary Clinton.
Oh my gosh. So that's number 6 on our list. Now we're going to, or number 7. Now we're going to go to number 6. And Todd, I'm going to need to partially grab a tinfoil.
Put on the tinfoil. And Jason, we are going to pop up a map here. All right. Here's the transition. So number 6, we have some Suez Canal crisis. And if you've been, it's kind of been talked about, not really. The last couple weeks or so, though, there's been some fighting in the Suez Canal, and a lot of major shipping companies said, we're not going through it. We're going to go around it. This has cost Egypt a ton of money. This has delayed a lot of transportation of particularly oil. But where things get really interesting, if we want to focus on this for just a second, Jason, is what happens if, instead of people deciding they're not going to go through there due to maybe some drone attacks or missile attacks, but what if the entire canal gets blown up?
Right. And actually, to put it, can you bring up that zoom in, Todd, too, so we can talk about how all this relates? So if you guys look at the Suez Canal, and we had that big picture up, basically anything coming from Asia or that side of the continent either needs to go through the Suez Canal or it needs to go all the way around. Now, everybody's looking at the Israel-Hamas conflict, and we're worried about World War III, which I think is a valid concern. I think that we could see escalation. Who knows if it goes nuclear? The entire Middle East wants Israel gone. But an interesting plot twist that actually Will had told us about is if you looked at Sinai Peninsula, used to be Israel territory, and now it's owned by Egypt. And Egypt gets all the revenue from all the shipping that goes through. With the conflict in Israel and the Suez Canal being kind of shut down, one thing Israel's proposed is the Ben Gurion Canal, which ironically would be a canal that would replace the Suez Canal that would go right through Israel, and Israel would control it. So if you take the war stuff out of what's going on in the Middle East, if you boil it down to economics, how powerful would it be for a country like Israel to control all the shipping revenue on everything that goes from Asia over to, and if you go back to that overall map, Todd, I mean, understand that everything coming from the Indian Ocean side to get to Europe wants to go through the Suez Canal. It's kind of the equivalent of the Panama Canal.
And Jason, I didn't verify this, but I was reading an article about this. The Ben Gurion Canal is, I'd heard whispers, but somewhat new. The map doesn't necessarily show it, but when you read about the path of that canal, it says it needs to go through some contested lands. We'll put it that way there. And so when you talk about possible contested lands, I'm just going to leave it at that for Facebook. When you talk about Suez Canal damage, there are a lot of motivations right now, you could argue, for things to happen so that this canal, this proposed canal, comes to fruition.
Right. So in the Middle East, you have Suez Canal with billions of dollars at stake. You have nuclear weapons. You have everybody.
Well, Jason, we forgot an important point on the Suez Canal too. You can see this originating out of Dubai in the Middle East with all the oil. Very likely event. So Nord Stream 2 gets blown up in Europe. Let's say there's no Suez Canal, so shipping takes longer for oil. You have a very high likelihood that Europe could freeze in a sense because they don't have enough resources anymore to heat their homes or their businesses or run their cars. Very, very interesting possibility. It doesn't affect the U.S. directly, but again, if Europe goes cold, I somehow think we're going to be involved in that.
Yeah. So the Middle East ranks number 6 as on our list of possible black swan events. So to kind of review our bottom 5: Russia, Ukraine escalation, China, Taiwan, sleeper cell activation, Joe Biden off the ticket, Middle East conflict going crazy, including the Suez Canal. Todd, should we get into the top 5?
Let's do it. But I'm going to pat you on the back, Jason. We did half the list in half an hour. You and I had no idea how this show would go, but it seems like we're on pace right now. So
yeah,
we did it.
It's funny. Each one of these could be their own show.
Very, very easily could be. But number 5 hits a little close to home, and we all remember this well. But Jason, the last time we had an election, this nation locked down because of a pandemic. We know that they're out there. We know that they're making them. What are the odds of a pandemic 2.0?
Yeah, and so it was interesting because we were wondering where to put this on the list. And we're like, okay, are people really going to fall for COVID again? And I think it's safe to assume, yeah, they are. I mean, raise your hand if you remember the COVID death tracker on every channel. And the only time you could leave your house is if you're going to a Black Lives Matter protest. And it was interesting because where we landed on it is pandemic, because they have all the mechanisms in place to cause a black swan event. Pandemic's got to be on the list top 5. The scary thing would be, though, is that relatively speaking, COVID was just a bad flu. Like there was more, once you flush out all the data, the number of deaths was a really bad flu season. But here's where this could get scary is what happens if you get a more lethal version or something like Ebola, which there was Ebola outbreaks in the nation. If you look, Bernie Sanders yesterday tweeted out that he got COVID again and he's isolating. So they're starting to grease the skids on pandemic 2.0. I don't think it could be higher on the list because I've got to think a bunch of Americans unless it's super lethal, aren't going to fall for it again. What do you think, Todd?
Well, that's just it here. We do know that the globalists never stay the same. So we've used the analogy of Trump when he first ran for president, when he came down the elevator in 2015. Oh, he's a misogynist and a racist. And then we saw the language escalate to white supremacist. Now he's Hitlerian. He's a dictator. He's an insurrectionist. So they had to amp up the language because people got desensitized, or they just kind of like, he's not a racist. I don't believe that. If you take that on the pandemic route, okay, you had COVID for what it was. Like you said, it could have been much worse. They're not going to do just a kind of milquetoast virus again. If they do it again, they are going to amp up the pandemic because they know, like you said, I'm not putting a mask back on. I'm not injecting my body with anything. The only reason that happens, or they coerce me, or they at least think they can coerce me, is if they up their game too and make this a little bit more serious.
Yeah, so we could easily be seeing something happen, and this time, like Todd said, because we're all kind of desensitized to it, that all of a sudden, well, let's turn up the lethality on these viruses, which is why they have the biolabs that everybody claims doesn't exist.
And if you think they wouldn't kill you, I don't think you remember COVID very well.
Right.
So I wouldn't put that past anybody. To say that they wouldn't do a worse virus after what we just endured since 2020, you haven't been paying attention, because they had no problem killing you the first time.
Exactly. And ironically too, notice nobody's even talking about holding anybody accountable for it.
I just tweeted this, Jason. The GOP House, have they had Fauci in the GOP controlled House to talk about what he did during the pandemic?
Nope. Negatory. Now all of a sudden ivermectin's okay. There's a bunch of it. They've just forgotten about it. But now as we go into number 4, this one, you got to put your thinking cap on. So zoom back to a year ago, and what was the big white thing in the sky everybody was raving about, Todd?
Oh, those were the Chinese spy balloons.
Right. So China launches spy balloons.
Whatever happened?
They fly all across the country. And remember I said some of these plot lines, like they came up before, now they're coming up again. Well, now it turns out more data is coming out about these Chinese spy balloons. There were just articles this week. They got zero mainstream news coverage. So we've known now that the U.S. government knew about them, and they weren't going to say anything until American citizens saw them up in the sky. We now know that there was communication between the spy balloons and different internet providers, let's say. They had linked up. And then Todd and I covered on our predictive programming episode that Michelle Obama and Barack Obama worked with Netflix to make a movie. And spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. By the way, it was a pretty good movie.
As far as the movie goes.
Yeah, as the movie goes. But spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, mute us for a minute or so. But Todd, what was the theme of that movie?
Well, Jason, it's funny you mentioned the spy balloons and hooking up with the internet. So the basic plot of the movie is internet gets shut down. They still have power, but they don't have internet. They don't have means of communication. And so imagine our technological world suddenly cut off from everybody else.
Now, if you go back into last year's news, news came out that Iran was doing cyber attacks against the U.S. power grid. There were how many data breaches that people seen? TikTok. And who controls TikTok? The Chinese Communist Party.
Of course.
Right. And that's on the majority of the devices in America. And actually, what was really well done with the movie is they talked about how if you have a cyber attack that requires 0 bullets to be fired, you shut off the internet, you could shut off infrastructure from electricity to a number of different services. I mean, what happens if they would shut down power in New York City for a week? What would the fatality rate be?
Well, and Jason, to kind of hit on the point that the movie makes at the very end, quite explicitly, you have one of the characters just spell it out. And additional side note, there's speculation that this character is a stand-in for Barack Obama. So if you rewatch the film or you go watch it for the first time, and you imagine this being Barack Obama talking, it gets quite interesting because he makes some comments about power and who's in control and stuff like that. But he says that what's going to happen is it plays out where if there's already division in society and you lose some of the mechanisms that kind of control or attempt to manage all that, the enemy doesn't have to come in, like you said, and fire a bullet, Jason. those factions within that country will tear themselves apart already, because now it's a license for survival. And you're going to do what you need to survive, and you're going to become tribal. And so New York City, there are people that do not like each other in New York City. You're going to see really fast, I think, immigrants, blacks, whites, left, right, if you want to go that way, but I think it'd be more along racial lines at this point. They're going to start fighting each other, and they're going to get the goods they need to survive and help their own survive.
Yeah, and if you think of this from a wider perspective, where are all your left-leaning people? They're in big urban structures, right? They're in cities. They don't produce anything. They don't know how to hunt or forage for food. I mean, there's people in these cities that think food just comes from the grocery store. They don't understand that if you're getting hamburger, there was a cow at the other end of it. Somebody had to raise. And if you think of electricity being shut down on some of these just through a cyber attack, I mean, how soon till it devolves into utter chaos? Now, where are they gonna go? Who has stuff? Conservatives have stuff. People in rural areas, people that have farms, people like Todd and I that stock up on survival food or canned goods.
Oh, no, we don't. Nope. Anyone
we don't.
In Minneapolis, I have nothing here.
That's right. I do not have any survival food. We have no water. We have no guns and ammo. We don't have extra we don't have any of that stuff.
Go to the next house. Yeah.
Go to the next house. Yeah, go to the one with the Black Lives Matter sign in it. I'm sure they got all that. But anyways, if you think of the framing, so conservatives who see some of this stuff coming in some cases have prepared. And why is this cyber attack so alluring? It's because it doesn't cost them much. They don't spend a troop. It doesn't cost them millions of dollars. I mean, for what they would pay for one assault on the mainland, you could get it done with some hackers. They've already demonstrated that they've had access to it. And like I say, as you go back through last year's news, look at how many times they talked about a cyber attack on some piece of infrastructure. And it was never covered on the front page. It was always covered at the bottom or on page 2. But they've shown that they have access to all this stuff. So that's why number 4 on our list, cyber attack in America.
Will it happen? Maybe, but I mean, is the technology there? Are the mechanisms in place to do it? Absolutely. And Jason, I like to think the only reason this isn't happening is a mutually assured destructive plan, where if they take out our power, we're taking out their power, and you have a global catastrophe. But boy, you said something that I hadn't thought about before with the TikTok app being on people's phones. How easy would it be if they had a kill switch for the app and it shuts down your phone that way? I had always pictured the spy balloon going over and zapping people's energy, but man, if you put their device right on your phone, it makes it a lot easier.
Well, yeah, and it's funny for a lot of people that don't know how some of this cyber stuff works. People that work in those power plants have TikTok on their phone. You know that their phone is connected to the work Wi-Fi. Because when we all go to work, we connect to the Wi-Fi network, and it doesn't take much if you're connected to a Wi-Fi to infiltrate other systems on your computer network. It's not all that hard to do. So
interesting. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Oh, now we're getting to my favorite.
We made it to number 3. I paused and laughed because here we are. I'm going to let you put the hat on. Jason, coming in at number 3, aliens. Take it away.
Oh my gosh. Oh, okay, folks. All right, I got to leave the tinfoil hat on for this one. So I'm a firm believer in predictive programming, and I think that the government works with the media to help grease the skid. So you look before COVID, what were all the things we were being hit with in the media? You were being hit with crazy things like zombie movies. Everything was about a virus. And then all of a sudden they unleash COVID. And now they're starting to seed the ground with things about cyber attacks, world war or civil wars, that kind of thing. But one thing that's entering the mainstream right now, and for somebody like me who's been into this stuff for a long time, it's aliens. And Todd, who spends way too much time on C-SPAN, there have been a number of congressional hearings on UFOs. Now, they're not calling them UFOs. They're calling, what are they calling them again, Todd?
UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Right. And there's actually been House hearings in the U.S. House of Representatives. There's been about 5 of them this year where they've been talking about UFOs. So this one's probably the most outlandish on the list. And this one, some people could argue belongs way lower on the list. But Todd, why would aliens be so dramatic if they were revealed to be true?
I mean, do you want to talk existentially or politically right now? I think number one, people's entire worldviews would be shattered up and turned upside down, saying we are not alone. Like answering that question. I got to admit, Jason, though, if they said the government could come out tomorrow and say UFOs and aliens are real, I wonder what percent of people would even believe them, though. There is so little trust that, I mean, you could show me and I might say that's a doctored video or that's a mannequin, or we're at a really interesting point now where they could tell us, and I would just say, I have my doubts still. Like, what's the reason behind you revealing this information right now? What are you trying to hide? What are you not saying? That would be pretty astounding.
Yeah, I think if you look at a Black Swan event as something that shakes the foundations of society and direct changes what people would or wouldn't go for, I got to say, personally, I think alien reveal, if you think of it, so the government took a really bad flu, they instituted overarching powers to change, make you not be able to leave your house, make you not be able to go to the store. Imagine if the alien reveal happens, how much the federal government would instantly declare an emergency and just decide to run over your entire life.
Well, and Jason, that's Project Bluebeam. We won't get into all the details, but folks, if you want to do some homework on maybe aliens isn't so far-fetched, there are government plans in place and there are theories around, if, like Jason said, if they reveal aliens to us, not necessarily the existential crisis I referred to, but the control they would put on your life to say, we need to protect you from these aliens.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to say, Todd and I went back and forth on number 3 being aliens. But I think I won him over where you'd see like, this one's probably the most outlandish. They've laid the foundation for it though. And it would give the government the most power in the shortest amount of time. So if they're looking to clamp things down, you got wars, you've got borders, you've got pandemics. Aliens, I think, gives the government carte blanche to do pretty much.
And when you talk fear of the populace, nothing gives up your own freedom like fear does. And so you would have a lot of people, I would imagine, if they did believe the news and okay, there's aliens, keep me safe, government. So worth noting, though, Jason, is the Gates clip here. This is why I took the screenshot. He's seen UAP images beyond any human capability. Do you think Gates is a credible source of information?
Oh, I do.
I do,
and
too.
they've shown him videos. They've had classified briefings on it. Even President Trump has made reference to some of the stuff they showed me is really scary. So, yeah.
Fascinating rabbit hole. That would be its own episode or a series of episodes right there. But aliens, we had to put it on the list because at this point, why not? Everything's on the table.
Right. Now we're getting to the top 2. And number 2, to be honest, could be its own entire episode. And because there are about 25 different ways it could go. And Todd, what's number 2 on the list?
Donald Trump. We've seen things happening already. We see things happening coming up. We know they're going to keep trying to do things to prevent Donald Trump from becoming elected president in November. Like I said, it's all on the table because they hate this man so much. They've lost touch with reality. They are in love with their power. So Jason, let's kind of walk through some Donald Trump stuff here.
Yeah. So as you look at Donald Trump, first thing that you have is you have 91 felony indictments against President Trump. Everything from January 6th stuff to they're going after his business now in New York. They're going after the electors and really a lot of the more serious things that they talk about, Todd, reference what he was trying to do with the Electoral College. Now, we've talked about, so Colorado removed him from the ballot. Now they're putting him on pending the Supreme Court. Maine just announced yesterday, the Secretary of State, I think it was, decided she was going to take him off
unilaterally.
Yeah, unilaterally. She just made the decision. I saw the January 6th hearing, so here we go. But if you look at that, look at how far we've come. Todd, you got that clip that was
this
back?
Feels like a lifetime ago, but let's go in the time machine here to 2016.
Right?
Donald Trump getting one step closer to officially becoming the next president of the United States today. All 538 members of the Electoral College casting their ballots across the country. The typically ceremonial process in the spotlight, since some are urging electors to go rogue and block Trump from the office. For that to happen, though, 37 Republican electors must switch their votes, a scenario seen as highly unlikely.
The question is whether there are 37 Republican electors who think that either there are open questions or that Donald Trump, based on everything we know about him, is really unfit to be president of the United States.
So far, only one elector, a Republican from Texas, has said he will not cast his vote for Trump.
It's time to pull the brake.
Some Republican electors say they've gotten thousands of letters, even death threats, after pledging to vote for Trump regardless of outside pressure.
It's utter hypocrisy, because I don't think that if the roles were reversed, most of these people would be okay with electors being faithless.
Trump fighting back, tweeting, "If my many supporters acted and threatened people like those who lost the election are doing, they would be scorned and called terrible names." After
Well,
that
that's
clip.
interesting. How many people have seen that before?
I was going to say that clip was from 2017. CNN is running a mainstream news story talking about all of the pressure that was being put on electors by citizens, by celebrities, by political officials to change their electoral college vote. Now, as we fast forward to 2023, 6 years later, President Trump is facing how many charges, somehow stemming around wanting people to reverse their electoral college vote. Does it make you shake your head, Todd?
That's all you can do is shake your head. And I don't even want to laugh because it's so serious at this point. But imagine John Podesta going on there and suggesting people should change the electoral vote. The man that ran Clinton's campaign, and to go on CNN, which all these electors watch, and you think there's no pressure on them, forget the death threats. Like, here's the Clinton campaign manager as well saying, you probably could think he's unfit because of all the information we know now, which we now know is a complete lie. And it was actually the Clinton campaign that fabricated all this and did the colluding, if you want to be real about that. I can't imagine. And then, like Trump said, though, he's always so right. Imagine if the roles were reversed. And now we don't have to imagine, because we're seeing what they did to people that question the election.
Right. And it's remarkable how far this has gone, because now they're talking about Trump committed insurrection and was trying to overthrow the government. We covered on one of the episodes how these January 6th folks, they're going after him for a Sarbanes-Oxley, which is an accounting law that they're going after for disrupting a government investigation or whatnot, government process. And so you think, so, okay, they're doing everything they can to get Trump off the ballot, to call him an insurrectionist, to throw him in jail. This could be huge black swan event, because like Shirley, we're with you. Vote Trump. We're in. That's who I'm going to be voting for. But if you look at how many Americans are ride or die with President Trump, the question will become what happens if they continue to push him off the ballot. Todd, how do you think that goes?
I mean, at this point, Jason, the more the Dems and the left go after Trump, I think you have to get more resolved and say it's Trump or nobody at this point, because you don't let them push you around like that. But if they can go after Trump, they can go after anybody, because we haven't seen anyone else come up to the level of Trump. He's got his own money. He's got his own FU attitude. He'll call everybody out there. He's really in our lifetime, there's no one else like him. And so you've got to stand behind Trump, because if you give into this, if you say, I'll vote for Haley or DeSantis or Vivek, because I don't want to deal with that headache or the media circus, you let them win. I don't know how else to say it, but you are letting them win.
Right. And so it's funny, you think about it too, where if you look at the establishment, they derailed his first presidential term. They throw everything they could at the guy. And then when he gets out of office, everybody watching this show knows if Trump doesn't say he's going to run for re-election, none of this is happening. They'll let him go off and do whatever. That's why none of these cases started until he said, hey, I'm going to run for re-election. And now they are emptying the clip with lawfare against President Trump in all these cases. And we've broke them all down on the show. They're bubkiss. But I got to say, I wouldn't want to be President Trump sitting in front of a DC jury. You know how that's going to go. So, I mean, there was a thing that came out this week in relation to the January 6th trial where Jack Smith is trying to not let President Trump submit evidence for why he thought the election was stolen. This isn't a court brief. I was reading it and I'm like, wait a second. So if the whole concept is, if President Trump's explanation is I was trying to have people look at the evidence. Here is the evidence of the shenanigans in the election. And Jack Smith won't even let him present it. Think of that. It's remarkable.
And people think this is an impartial prosecutor just trying to do God's honest work here. Just, yep, Trump committed a crime. But boy, when you're not allowed to defend yourself or present evidence for yourself, is this a courtroom or is this just Stalin-esque again?
Right. Well, and that's where it comes funny, because I've heard from Democrats for years about how all voting rights are so important, and just by having to show up on election day with an ID, you're racist, you're disenfranchising voters. But now they're okay with the Secretary of State in Maine just saying, he doesn't belong on the ballot. It's truly remarkable.
He's an insurrectionist, even though he has not been charged with the crime of insurrection.
Right. Yeah, and suddenly everybody is a constitutional scholar when they're talking about what
when it comes
know.
to Donald Trump, they all know the Constitution.
Right. Yeah. But then here's what's interesting, because if Trump doesn't stop and the lawfare doesn't work, we've talked about it on the show. I mean, I'm having JFK flashbacks myself, Todd. What about you?
It's an escalation, and there's nowhere else to turn. If you can't get him off the ballot using, I'm going to use legal in air quotes because nothing they're doing is legal. But if none of that works and he's still there in November and you know he's going to win. I mean, Jason, if the election were held today or November and it was honest, Trump wins in a landslide.
100%.
They can't let that happen. And so what's the only bullet left in the chamber going to be used for?
Literally the bullet in the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other one, too, with the whole Trump being the Black Swan event that we talked about a little bit, and it could have almost been its own thing. I think one of the last institutions that we have in America, people have no faith in the government. People have no faith in the FBI, the CIA, the IRS. They have no faith in their politicians. The last bastion, I think, that normal Americans can look at is the legal system, in particular the Supreme Court. Now, you can look at all these decisions in the lower courts and go, okay, you can see the compromise, you can see the corruption in all these courts. How are these people judges making this decision? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, really, you're going to kick a guy off the ballot for insurrection, even though he's never been charged and never been convicted under some crazy
Civil War legislation. Yeah, forget Sarbanes-Oxley 20 years ago. This is 160 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you're just using all these crazy novel theories to go after him. But where do all these things land? The Supreme Court. And it's a conservative Supreme Court that the left has been going after for years. And I think on the right, as you say, or even just libertarian, if you just think the government's corrupt, you can look at the Supreme Court as something that's the least corrupt of all of it. But if the Supreme Court comes back with a ruling that says something like, hey, these January 6th things should be thrown out because you're applying the wrong law, this shouldn't be used in that way, what's the left going to do? They're going to do a full-on assault on the Supreme Court. And you remember when they were just trying to put Kavanaugh on the court. I mean, there were more violent protests in January 6th. They were outside his house.
Or when they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade and they they had someone go to assassinate Kavanaugh. They were protesting outside of these conservative judges' houses every day. Jason, I don't think they're just going to protest outside in the street with signs this go around.
Right. All right. So Trump, number 2. Just to recap our list. Number 10, Russia, Ukraine. Number 9, China, Taiwan. Number 8, terrorist attack through people coming through the border. 7, Joe Biden's off the ticket. 6, escalation in the Middle East conflict, keeping an eye out for the Suez Canal. 5, pandemic 2.0, new and improved and even better than the last time. 4, cyber attack that they're prepping you for. 3, aliens. Let's just go wild. 2, something with Trump. But Todd, what's number 1 on our list?
I think we see the low rumblings of a civil war. Jason, this society is not going, we're hanging by a thread right now. We are completely divided. We don't see eye to eye on pretty much anything. And so, as you and I said before the show, whatever outcome we get in the 2024 election, no one's going to believe it. The other side, it's going to be a 50-50 vote, popular vote. Someone's going to eke out the electoral victory, and the other side is not going to agree with the results. And I think that's going to be, and you're going to have leading up to this, like I said, the low rumblings of a civil war, and we'll see how that plays out. But the House divided thing, Jason, is coming to pass.
Yeah, and we've played it on a previous episode. Folks, if you haven't seen it, movie trailer's out, dropping in March. The title is Civil War. And it talks about a full breakdown of America and separation. And I mean, when you talk about the Civil War, other than slavery, a big part of it was people just said, we just don't want to be part of the Union anymore. Now, flashback in time, when Trump was elected, there was talk that California, Washington, Oregon, states on the West Coast could look at seceding from the Union. If I'm in Texas, honestly, I'm looking at my politicians and I'm saying the federal government is allowing millions of people to cross into Texas. The Texas governor has no power to remove those people from the country. They just passed a law that said, okay, we're going to make it illegal for illegal immigrants to be in Texas, and the federal government's going to sue them. And I gotta say, I know some people from Texas. They're very strong. They're very independent. I don't think it's outlandish for Texas to turn up the heat, or Texas to say, hey, we no longer want to be part of the United States because you guys are screwing us so bad. And pick your reason, but I think border is probably the biggest one. If Trump wins, or when Trump hopefully wins, who would be shocked if there were states in the union that said, you know what, I no longer want to be part of the union. And all this is gearing us up for a civil war.
Yep. Yeah. It could be how hot it remains to be determined, Jason. But at some point, and especially I've been saying this since Biden took office, and if a Democrat wins again, but I think you just start ignoring the federal government if you're a red state. And if they pack the Supreme Court, you just ignore the Supreme Court. But in essence, there's your revolt right there. It's not a hot war necessarily, but if you just say, I'm not listening to the federal government anymore, I don't care about your legal decisions because they're not based on law or the Constitution, not listening to your edicts because, again, that's not about freedom here. That could happen the other way too. And honestly, Jason, we're in Minnesota here. I haven't thought much about this, but what do you do if Minnesota, which they won't do, but secedes from the union too?
Right. And that's what's fascinating, is that everything is so polarized right now that if a Democrat wins and they continue these disastrous policies, I completely see some red state out there somewhere have a governor who says, no, we're out. And, you know, the predicate for the Civil War, if you go back and study it, it was slavery. And do they allow slavery into the new states they were admitting into the union? But what actually prompted the Civil War to start was when states seceded from the union and they said, nah, we're out, you know, good luck. Lefty states were already talking about it when Trump was elected. I see wild times ahead.
I think it all comes together. Black Swan event or not, I just don't see how the union stays intact this way. Something's got to give. And if it's something that unifies us, I don't know what that could possibly be. Our list is basically events that are going to create further division, though, in some way or another here. Either pro-war, anti-war, pro-conservative, anti-conservative, but something's going to give here, and it doesn't seem like it's going to unite us based on our list here.
Right. Well, folks, let us know in the comments if there's anything we missed on the list. Let us know if there's something you think should have been higher, or it's going to be if there's something that should have been included. I like Jody's comment. Assemble the states and take back our country from the corporate government. 100%. And honestly, that's why we support President Trump. President Trump is not part of the political machine that's been destroying this country for decades. But as we go into 2024, I'm going to have an ask for everybody listening. And thanks for the participation. Follow us on Twitter. Go to our website, theamericantribune.com. You can also go to theamericantribune.news, which is where we do our deeper dive information, the stuff we can't put on social media. We've covered a bunch of Epstein stuff on there, all that sort of thing. But most importantly, share this content with somebody. And especially, I encourage you to share it with somebody that you might not politically agree with. Because the fact of the matter is, Todd and I both think the Republican Party's trash. Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, all those guys are not serving Americans. Now, there's a handful up there that are. Guys like Matt Gaetz, I think, are pretty good. President Trump, I think, is trying to serve Americans. Byron Donalds, those sorts of folks. But overall, on the right, Donald Trump woke us up. And he said the corporate Republican Party is screwing you. We need to wake those people up on the left. Because there's people on the left that are being screwed just as bad as the Republicans were, but they refuse to accept it. So share our content with folks like that. Tell them to give it a chance. Say, hey guys, like break this down and tell us where we're wrong. Tell us where we have our facts wrong. And not just for this podcast, but any podcast we do. But we're on here every Friday. And so we really appreciate you guys tuning in and supporting the work that we do. And hopefully we brought value, but stay safe out there, folks. 2024 is going to be a crazy year. And with that, Todd, I'll let you bring us home.
Yeah, look out for the aliens. So number 3 on the list. But everyone have a great New Year's Eve, however you celebrate. If you stay up till midnight, I have 2 little kids, so I will not watch the ball drop. But it's been a great 2023, and folks, we'll see you on the other side in 2024. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.